Good morning, everyone. All right, we are at 109. I think this may be a record since I've been involved in GIS 101. So why don't I start the introductions while people are just finishing up joining us, and then we'll dive in. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's GIS 101 webinar from NSGIC. We are very excited to have you guys here. For those of you who are new, we put these on about once a quarter to help bring topics that we feel are incredibly important and that we want to discuss with one another and learn more about. So we get together typically via Zoom so that anyone else who wants to join us can. So today's presentation will be about GISP and GIS certification. Actually, this started with Jamie and I talking. Jamie and I are good friends, and we're talking about, I've been doing GIS for a bit of time. So I've seen the power for GISP. I recommend it to all of my newer employees. But I was like, I'm older. I've got experience. I'm good. I don't really need the GISP. And Jamie started mentioning all the ways that it's valuable for my team members and I to have it, things that are changing in the industry. So this isn't the basics of the GIS certification. I think a lot of us know that. We can see these, we've seen it at other places. This is more, okay, what's the value that it brings to you, whether you're entry level, whether you're managing a team, whether you're government or private industry. So I am very excited to introduce 3 people who are incredibly active in the field and know a lot about this. So we have Tony Spicci, the Executive Director of the GIS Certification Institute. We have Jamie Dennis, the owner and president of Geodetic Analysis, BAM, the one I've known the longest. I just blew up. And then we've got Liz DiGeronimo, the Geographic Information Officer for New York State. So with that, I will turn off my video and pass it to you guys. Thank you. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Tony, Liz, and Jamie will speak for a bit, and then we will have plenty of time for questions at the end. You can raise your hand at the end and or put them in chat, whichever works best for you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Shay. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. As Shay said, my name is Tony Spicci. I'm the Executive Director of the GIS Certification Institute. And I have both Jamie and Liz here with me to talk a little bit about the GISP and the importance of the GISP and the geospatial profession, and more importantly, the importance of certification as part of a profession. So my experience with NSGIC goes back to I think it's 1994. So I'm hoping to make it to 30 years. That's kind of a goal of mine. So if you don't know, NSGIC's very, very important to me. Just a great organization, and I'm really excited to see so many new faces here in the seminar. So hopefully you're going to find this beneficial. So real quick, I want to tell you a little bit about the GIS Certification Institute. We're a not-for-profit organization, and we provide the geospatial community with the internationally recognized GIS certification program, the GISP certification. We are not-for-profit. We're located in the United States, but we do have GISPs in over 59 countries and growing, so we do have an international presence. And our organization really kind of got its spiritual start in the late 1990s when a number of geospatial professionals, including folks in NSGIC, were starting to have the discussion about professional certification within the geospatial industry. At the time, there was not a true geospatial certification out there that was available to folks. And as I'll talk about in some slides, that is a natural part of the progression of a profession. And so a discussion was held. A lot of different organizations participated. Again, NSGIC was one of them. A survey was done by ERISA. And basically, there was a desire to see the industry move forward and create professional certification. So that's kind of where we got our start. So we've been around a little over 20 years right now. We are a governance-based organization, so we have a board of directors that leads our organization and helps it grow. There's currently 4 associations that make up our board, NSGIC being one of them. We also have the American Association of Geographers, University Consortium for Geographic Information Science, URISA, or the Urban and Regional Information Systems Association. And then we have a 9th board member that represents the entirety of the geospatial community. So not everybody is involved with any of these 4 organizations. So it's very important to make sure that we have complete representation. As soon as we get the MOU signed, we anticipate ASPRS, or the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, to be joining our board. So that's going to help grow our board by 2 members and bring on more representation. And we really look forward to working with ASPRS on their certification industries in the remote sensing and photogrammetry fields. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of certification. So I'm going to talk on 2 different perspectives. I'm going to talk a little bit about certification as its own entity, and then I'm going to talk about what we do at the GISCI with the GISP. So one of the questions we get a lot of people asking is like, why should I certify? What is the point in me certifying? Professional certification is a process by which an individual shows that they have acquired the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to perform in a specific profession. Certification is not unique to the geospatial profession. There's over 1,600 professional certifications and licensures in the United States alone. But the geospatial industry is actually fairly young. And so where does certification fit in, and how does it fit in within our industry? And so it is just a part of a natural progression for any industry. And really, where an industry or profession gets a start, it gets a start as an idea. So GIS, you can debate when it started. I would argue that spiritually, at least, GIS started in the late 1800s when a doctor in London was trying to figure out why folks were getting cholera. And so he created a map and basically looked at spatial analysis to conclude that the common source for cholera was these public drinking supplies, these public wells. And so that was, in my opinion, that was kind of the first true type of GIS, even though it didn't have computers as the background. But it got people thinking. It was an idea, right? And so that idea slowly grew, and as technology took hold, and we had these things called mainframe computers that took up entire rooms and, could process data at a blistering snail speed. Folks said basically, hey, listen, we now have computers that can do this geospatial analysis for us. And so we started to see the advent of the GIS technology. And so back in the 60s, I'd say, is when this really started taking hold and started growing. We had folks that were creating and writing software. We had folks doing it in the private sector. We had a lot of government folks writing software. So some of you may remember programs like GRASS that was free to use. And we started seeing the birth of the geospatial technology. It took hold and it started growing. And then we had what became an industry. So we went from GIS software to an industry that was now doing things with data, doing things with computers, doing things. We had GPS come on board, and we started to see this big growth, right? So instead of having the government write software and people use it on mainframe computers, the idea was moving from the technology into an industry, and we had all kinds of investment. And GIS really started to blow up in the late 1990s. So for me personally, I kind of came in right where we were moving from technology to industry. I started in the early 1990s. As the industry grew, as we started to see expansion of GIS from a group of people, literally there were a couple thousand of us in the early 1990s, to tens of thousands and now millions of people using this, it grew from an industry into a profession. And that's kind of where that URISA poll came into place, where they asked their members. And that's really where those discussions started. And I was part of those discussions where we were, folks are sitting around drinking beers and asking these existential questions about what they did, right? So when I first started in 1992 doing GIS, I told my parents, hey, I graduated, I got a job, really excited. And they said, what do you do? And I told them, I said, I was a GIS specialist. And they're like, great, what is that? And I explained it to them. And they're like, yeah, can you tell me what that is again? And I explained it to them again in full detail and explained what I did, GIS, software, computers. They just went out and told all their friends that I made maps for National Geographic, because nobody knew what GIS was back then except for a small group of folks, right? And so as the industry grew, as people grew into the industry, there was that question: are we just GIS fill in the blank? So GIS specialists, GIS analysts, or are we professionals? Are we folks that really know what's going on in our field and our profession? And that's where GIS has moved into. It's gone from an industry into a profession where we have geospatial professionals. And this is just like any other idea that's become a profession. And so part of the natural progression of any industry into a profession is that professional certification. And that's where the GISCI comes on board. We created what is currently the only true geospatial certification in our industry, and it allows the industry to continue to grow and continue to diversify. So how do we define a profession? What gives us folks the ability to say we're part of the geospatial profession? You need a couple things. You need self-awareness. I think most of us know what that is as it relates to GIS. You have to have a unique body of knowledge. Our GISP is based on the GIS, the internationally recognized GIS body of knowledge. So we're basically using an international compendium of what we do as a profession to define how we do our certification. A social ideal to unify the professionals. I think all of us know why we're in this. We're in this to do better things, right? That's that social ideal. Everybody that I know that's truly into GIS and geospatial technologies, if you ask them why they do it, it's because they want to do things better than they were done in the past. And so that's what I think is our social ideal, is to be better and to do things better. You need a formal organization of its members. NSGIC is a great example of that. NSGIC's been around, oh goodness gracious, probably coming up on 40 years now. ERISA is over 60 years ago. So we've had these organizations, we have many organizations out there that have helped formalize what we do and that help move our profession forward. And that's what these organizations do. That's what NSGIC does. It moves our industry and our profession forward. If we didn't have these organizations, that wouldn't happen. And that's why they're very important. You need a Hall of Fame. There actually is at least one geospatial Hall of Fame that I know of, and that's ERISA's Hall of Fame. And so there are folks that have been inducted into that, and you can go online and find out who they are. And then finally, and I think one of the most important things is a code of ethics. Our GISP is built on the Geospatial Code of Ethics. So that was developed independent of our process. But we have latched onto that. And actually, one of the former NSGIC presidents, Will Craig, had a very instrumental role in writing that Geospatial Code of Ethics. And so you can't be a GISP if you don't agree to abide by those code of ethics. And that's the same for any profession. If you don't have that code of ethics, it's really not a profession. So what are some common elements of a certification? So now we have our profession, we're putting a certification on top of it. A certification has to be awarded by a professional organization. In the case of the GISP, it's us, the GIS Certification Institute. It's a confirmation that you possess specific knowledge or skills needed to do a job. Our certification is a test and portfolio-based certification. Most certifications and most licensure requires both a test and a portfolio of some sort. So that is the common element, but there are some certifications that are portfolio only based. Not many, but there are some. You typically earn a certification after completing education and experience. So in the case of the GISP, that's 4 years of professional experience and education. And I'll talk a little bit more about the education in a little bit. Certification involves meeting specific standards and usually passing an exam. And again, our GISP is exam-based. And then finally, any professional credential is going to be valid for a limited amount of time and must be renewed. And the reason for this is very simple. When you initially get your certification, it proves that you have met that criteria. But as everyone knows here, our profession is constantly moving forward. And so if you want to say that you are a professional in your profession, you have to evolve with that profession. And so part of any certification program is going to include things like continuing education, continuing experience, and continuing activities in the profession. And so with the GISP, we're a 3-year profession. We're a 3-year certification. And then if you choose to renew that certification, you could do it again for 3 years. And so during that 3-year interval, for us, you're required to do education and contributions back to the profession. Experience is allowable as a supplemental activity, but you actually don't need to work to keep our certification. But again, this is what all certifications do. So why certify? Let's get back to that original question. The reason why folks certify and why it's important is because it's a demonstration to behaviors and a commitment to those behaviors that help enrich our profession. Again, we talked about how we move from an industry to a profession. The biggest difference between an industry and a profession is that element of professionalism. It's the things that you do that advance that industry, and that's where that profession comes in. So if you want to be certified, you have to do those activities and behaviors to move forward with your profession. Certification is an opportunity to grow your professional skills and knowledge. In order to get certified, you have to have a certain knowledge base, and then in order to keep that certification, you have to continually add to that knowledge base and continually to advance with the profession. Certification is differentiation from others in your profession. And that's one of the biggest things. I said earlier, our profession is very young. The geospatial industry is very young. And we are growing, obviously, and maturing. When you look at other industries that are parallel to us, like surveying and engineering, it is an expectation, if not a requirement, in those industries to get those certifications and licensures, because it's that differentiation. It's that checklist, or that basically box that says you've done all the things that the industry recognizes as critical to being a part of the profession. And so in our geospatial profession, where we have over 6 million jobs out there and folks in those jobs in the United States alone, how do you qualify somebody as to whether or not they meet that criteria? And that's one thing that certification does. It also increases your earning your earning potential. We know from an older study, so this is 2017, ERISA did a study, and we found that 62% of all GISPs made more than their peers. In a newer study that we did, we found that 85% of all employers will support their GISPs in some manner. So that could be a pay increase, it could be a pay bonus, but it also means things like paying for your fees and exam, paying for your continuing education, sending you to conferences so you can get that continuing education, and those types of activities. When I worked for the state of Missouri, getting travel approval was very, very difficult. Being able to go to my supervisor and say, I need to go to this conference because it's part of my professional certification, was one of the ways that I was able to not only get that funding, but also the approval to go. So that was very important to me when I worked for the state. And then if for nothing else, certification is validation of your abilities. Again, if you have a sense of personal pride, I certainly do. The reason why I got my GISP was to prove that, but I met that criteria, right? And I told myself, if I didn't meet the criteria for the GISP, then I was going to go out and basically work to get that criteria, because I wanted to call myself a professional in the field. So I did it personally for me. Down the line, I did actually get, some of the bonuses I talked about, like travel for education and the like. But certification is that validation. So you heard me talking a little bit about licensure, and that's a big question, as well as what we call certificates. So we have a lot of folks that'll come to us and say, well, I have a GIS certificate. Isn't that the same thing? And a certificate is different from a certification. A certificate is an indication that you finished some type of educational or vocational program and the coursework associated with it. Certificates are typically academically based, although we do have friends in the military that have certificate programs for their soldiers that are very similar to an academic program. They're like 600-800 hours. And when they graduate, they have a certificate that said they've completed that coursework. But at the end of the day, a certificate is really an educational, at least in the geospatial industry, it's an educational pathway. Certificates are great, and we highly encourage them, and we recognize them as part of the GISP, but they're not certification. Certification is that official document that proves that you've obtained that certain level of knowledge, achievement within your profession that qualifies you for your line of work. So the certification, again, like we talked about, it comes from an organization, it's based on industry standards, and it's that professional recognition that you've met the criteria. The third item on this list is licensure. And licensure is a little different in that it's similar to certification, but it's proof that you are licensed to work in your profession. The biggest difference between the two is that licensure is a legal designation, and it comes with a very clear set of requirements for each vocation. So the best example I can give you that's related to what we do is surveying. if you want to be a surveyor, you have to be licensed in the United States. And every state is going to have some level of licensure requirements, more than likely codified in state statutes. So in Missouri, there's state statutes about what and how a surveyor performs. And so if you want to be a state surveyor, so I'm in the state of Missouri, we have 8 neighbors. So if I'm in St. Louis and I want to do work in Missouri and I want to do work in Illinois, I have to be licensed in both states. So basically licensure follows you on a state-by-state basis. I myself have, I have 2 certifications and 3 licensures. I am licensed to shoot fireworks, that's 2, and I'm a licensed EMT. And I'm only licensed to do those activities in the state of Missouri. My 2 certifications, Certified Government Meeting Planner and a GISP, those go with me wherever I go because there is no legal designation state by state or nation by nation for the GISP. That's why the GISP is recognized worldwide because it is a certification. It doesn't have that legal designation like licensure does, but it still has that, that attestation that you've met the requirements of the profession and the certification. So this slide actually needs to be updated a little bit, but there's over 1,600 types of certification across the United States of America. Chances are pretty good that if you've ever done anything with a cosmetologist, so you get your hair cut, you get your nails done, chances are pretty good they're going to have certification. Why? Well, those folks they're working in the healthcare industry, right? I mean, those activities are considered forms of healthcare and that there's certain health standards that they have to follow. And so they have to be certified. They have to meet the requirements. A lot of times you see this in food handling. The medical industry is another one where you see a combination of licensure and certification. And then, of course, I think probably the one that everybody knows about is a CPA, right? If you're going to go to an accountant and have them manage your money, are you going to go to any old accountant or are you going to pick somebody with CPA, which is a certified public accountant? CPA indicates that that person has met the requirements of their profession to perform professionally within it. And so whether it's a CPA, a GISP, you know, it's very common across our profession. And indeed, we have over 17% of the workforce has some type of certification or licensure. Within our GIS profession, there are 4 different certifications that have existed over the years. And this is where I need to update the slide a little bit. So ASPRS has 10 different types of certifications. They are on 2 different levels. So it's 5 certifications at a technician level and a professional level. One of those is a GISP. However, they have sunsetted that certification. That's no longer offered. USGIF they created the GeoInt or Geospatial Intelligence certification. That too is no longer offered. It was sunsetted. It may come back, but the last time I checked, it was still on hold. So that leaves only 2. Esri offers technical certifications, and some of you may have that. But the difference with Esri's certifications is it's a technical certification based on software. So it's based on their ArcGIS certification, their ArcGIS products. So that is a technical certification, and for a lot of folks, that's a great thing to get. The difference between us and Esri, though, and the Esri certifications is we're a professional certification. So our certification doesn't look at specific software, rather it looks at the entirety of the profession. So right now, the GISP is the only active certification for professionals in the geospatial community. Who certifies? This also needs to be a little updated. We just recently completed a survey. Prior to about 3 or 4 years ago, over half of our GISPs were from the private sector. And actually, I'm sorry, I got the right slide. So over 50% of our folks were from the private sector. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen substantial growth in government as to all of our new GISPs. So the majority of our new GISPs right now coming in are government workers, and it's primarily local and state. There are some federal folks, but we've seen a tremendous growth. Now, we still have a number of professional folks getting their GISPs, and really what we see is we have a lot of professional folks, I say professional, basically industry folks that are keeping their GISPs. So that group of folks was the ones to get them initially. But we've seen tremendous growth within the government, and so now over half of our GISPs our government folks. And again, that's really good and really exciting. Then about 16% fall in the other categories, from tribal to not-for-profit like myself. And believe it or not, we do have a few students that have their GISP. Not very many, but we do have a few. So why is certification important to you? And it really depends on who you are. Are you a professional or are you a supervisor? So, the first question I would ask is, what is a geospatial professional? We talk about that a lot, but how do you define what a geospatial professional is? If you're hiring somebody, how are you going to qualify the geospatial capabilities of a new hire? When I used to work for the Department of Conservation, I might get 60 people applying for a job. And I might know 5 or 6 of them just simply because I'd worked with them in the past. Well, I don't want to interview 60 people. So for me, one of my initial screening criteria was the GISP. Assuming you met the qualifications of the job description, the next step was the GISP. I would literally use that as one of my first filters because I knew those folks had demonstrated the ability to get the certification itself. And I also knew that these folks were motivated to go out and learn things and go out and basically learn into my position. So I knew that they were going to be a good person to interview. Since I left the Department of Conservation, they've made that a requirement of the employment. And we're seeing that more and more. So more and more folks are requiring GISP to either be as part of the hiring process or within a few years of getting hired, simply because it's a good way of qualifying somebody. Another important thing to understand is that experience does not equal foundational knowledge. We are finding, we do a lot of work with other associations, and we've got some friends at the World Geographic Industry Council, WGIC. And what they're finding are 2 things that are very interesting and troubling at the same time. One is there's an increasing gap in the amount of jobs and the number of qualified applicants. So we don't have enough people to fill jobs. Number 2, we don't have enough qualified folks to fill jobs. In the old days, if you needed to hire a bunch of people for a project, you just went out and bought a company, right? I need 25 programmers. I'm going to buy this company. Now I got 25 programmers. Well, you can't do that anymore. All those companies are all gone. And so what these big companies are finding, like companies like Food Grow that need to hire 200 people, yeah, they can get 200 people applying for the job, but when they show up, they don't understand conceptual ideas and conceptual foundations. And we know this, talking to our academic folks, they'll tell you right now, most people coming out of college are being taught software because that's what's easy. They're not being taught those foundational concepts. And really great example I could give you is when I did this talk in Arizona last summer. I had somebody come up to me and say, hey, I've been a GIS specialist for 10 years. I didn't know what a datum was until a couple of weeks ago. If you don't know what a datum is, I'm sorry, you're not a geospatial professional. You're just not, because that's foundational to our industry. And just because somebody looks good on paper and has a nice resume doesn't mean that they're going to meet the qualifications. So for you as an individual, a GISP is going to benefit you in the following ways, and really any professional certification. It gives you that competitive advantage. It puts you in a better position for employment opportunities. We know that a lot of our GISPs are getting raises, especially like states like California where they're union shops. The union's going to go ahead and give you that raise either when you get your GISP or shortly thereafter. Any type of professional certification is going to help grow your foundational knowledge and your skills. It helps establish professional credibility. One of the most important things to realize is that our GISP, it's not our idea, and it's not something that we maintain and grow. It's something that the geospatial community does. So even though it's done by the GISCI, we're looking to our member organizations, we're looking to our GISPs, and we're looking to the international community to base everything that we do on our certification on those standards. It's basically a certification that's recognized by the profession. Being a part of any type of certification program requires you to give back to the profession. That's critical to helping our profession grow and move forward. And it's really an encouragement for you to be present in our profession. Again, there are so many people that go to school, they learn XYZ software package backwards and forwards, they do their job and they go home. Well, that's great, but that's not what moves our profession forward. Imagine what things would be like for state government if there was no NSGIC. No NSGIC, nobody else. You wouldn't have all the coordination activities. You wouldn't have 50 states plus our insular areas working with the federal government to advance national programs. The only way those things happen is if you're present in your profession, if you're a part of these organizations, whether it's NSGIC, ERISA, we have a lot of folks, American Society of Floodplain Managers. That's what moves our profession forward. That's what helps us advance what we do. And so the most important thing I could tell you about getting professional certification, becoming a GISP, is that it's an investment. It's not an expense. It's not a check writing activity. It's an investment in yourself, and it's your investment in your profession. If you're a hiring manager and you're looking to hire folks, how do you qualify somebody? The most important thing that I could tell you about any professional certification is that it is that qualifier. It is attestation that that person met the requirements of that certification. So in our case, it'd be the portfolio and the exam. But more importantly, it tells you about the character of the person. That person's present in the profession, and they're willing to go out and work on their own to achieve the results that they see in themselves as a professional. That's what you really want as a supervisor, right? You want somebody that's going to constantly move forward in this profession. And having been in the profession for 30 years, I can tell you right now, the second you learn something about our software program or a methodology or technique, it changes. I still use mobile software, and every time I sit down to use it, I have to reacquaint myself with the existing software and then figure out all those changes, right? And we've all gone through that. So if you're not keeping up, you're going to get left behind really, really quickly. And then if you're a supervisor, why would you support certification for your staff? I think Shade kind of mentioned that, she's far enough in her career that GISP isn't a priority for her. And I get that, and I understand that. But if you're that supervisor, you really should be investing in your staff. Even if you don't support certification, you're going to need to get those folks education. You really should be developing as a professional. You should be getting them out there. You should be getting in organizations like NSGIC or regional organizations. And you really should be encouraging them to grow in with that profession. So as a supervisor, as an employer, creating a GISP is not an expense. It's an investment in your staff. And I'm here to tell you, folks aren't going to stick around if you're not going to invest in them. I mean, there's so much job movement as it is. It's in your best interest to make sure that your folks are the best that they can be. Even if they leave you after 5 or 10 years, you're still helping build out a profession and advance it. So a vibrant and dynamic workforce is going to rely on continuing professional development and a narrowing of the skills gap. A successful workforce is going to be present within the workplace and a profession, and a workforce whose character is built on ethics can never fail. That applies to any profession, and it certainly applies to ours in the geospatial. Ethics is the cornerstone of all that we do, as is advancing our profession and advancing the individuals within it. So real quickly, if it's okay, I just wanted to throw in a couple quick slides. One of the things that we're doing is working with our employers to help endorse the GISP program and help them invest in their employees. So basically, and I know we're very limited on time and I've gone over. So reach out to me if you want to learn more about this, but the GIS endorsing employer designation is a designation that we give to employers that invest in their employees. So if you're one of those employees, you might want to talk to your management about investing in you. And if you're one of those employers, let's talk about that a little bit more. And I want to real quickly just throw out that we are working on an entry-level credential called the GISPE, or Emerging GIS Professional, which we hope to roll out next spring. So check out our website for more information. So I'd like to close out and then open up questions if we have time with a statement from Bill Johnson, who used to be the New York GIO, and I think he had a CIO role as well. So if you don't know Bill, Bill was actually very active in NSGIC for many years. He was a president. I came in as president, I think 1 or 2 terms after him. So we had a lot of overlap. We spent a lot of time on board. And when I first got on board, we did a survey. So I believe it was Jamie and Liz did a survey with NSGIC and kind of asked NSGIC folks about the GIS program. We just want to kind of get a sense about folks in NSGIC and what they thought. And Bill responded to the survey, and I saw what he wrote, so I actually reached out and had a phone call with him. Bill was like me. Bill did not get his GISP initially when it came out. And I think he got it around the time I did, around 2012. And so I asked Bill, Now, Bill kind of made the comment he had kind of dismissed the program when it originally came out. And so I said, well, Bill, you're GISP now. What changed your mind? Why did you get GISP? And he told me, he said, well, when I actually took the time to kind of learn about the program, what it was represented and where it was in the process, he said, I realized that it was an activity that reinforces behaviors that help enrich our profession. And so that was what inspired him to get his GISP. And I think that really describes what we're trying to do with the GISP. Getting your GISP is a long-term investment. Keeping that is a long-term investment in yourself. But as we look across our industry, we know that GISPs are very active and they're really instrumental in moving our profession forward. And so with that, I'll close it out and I will gladly take any questions. And I would encourage both Jamie and Liz to chime in and let me know if I missed anything.
Hey, Tony. No, I think that was great. We just have a really great question that comes up a lot that's in the chat there. Jesse asks if GISPs that were grandfathered into the certification will ever be required to take the exam, because to them it seems only fair to require everyone to pass the exam to be qualified for a GISP.
So that is a great question. And here's what I will tell you. When the GISP program first got started and it was originally a vision, there was always a plan for an exam. But the exam took a lot more work, a lot more time, and significant amount of money to implement. And so a decision was made to start with a certification-only based, a portfolio-based certification, and to add the exam when it was ready. And the exam was added over 10 years ago. So basically the GISP's been around 20 years, and half the time it's been around, it's had the exam. The portfolio requirements were significantly more rigorous than they are today for the entry-level GISPs. So while you can argue that it's not the same for folks that have the exam that don't, I would argue that it's not the same for the exam people, for the folks that have the certification. And if we want to be equitable, we would have to go back and require all existing GISPs pre-exam to take the exam and pass it. And then we would have to go to every post-exam GISP and ask them to resubmit their portfolio. So the reality is it's not going to happen. What we did is not unprecedented. It's how most certifications grow. And as every new GISP comes into the program, they have to go through both the portfolio and the exam. I will also tell you that the folks that are pre-exam are mostly retiring out of the profession. So in about the next couple of years, there will be significantly more folks that are exam-based than are not. So I know conceptually it doesn't seem fair, but if you look and examine the portfolio requirements, you'd understand that there was rigor on both sides of the exam before and after.
That's a good question. We have another question in the chat asking about the educational requirements of the background in geography. To get the GISP, do you need to have a geography background?
You do not. And so this is what's interesting. A lot of certifications will say you have to have X this, X that, X this. What we did with our portfolio is we basically said, you need to have this much education, these many hours, and here's how you can get it. So on the educational side, you can basically anything that you do, virtual or in person, will count if it's educational. So any degree, we take any degree because we value education. Becoming a geospatial professional is not taking GIS classes, right? If you look at our body of knowledge, there's over 700 categories, or sorry, 400 categories. So any degree is going to get you points. But then when we look at academic coursework, now we're looking at anything that falls in the geospatial body of knowledge. So obviously geography with GIS, geospatial, but when you look at like field methodology, statistical courses, math courses, engineering, surveying, planning, all of that will count towards your point requirements. And so for initial GISPs, most folks are going to use their college experience to get points because you get a lot. But then after that, it's really any type of webinar, seminar, conference, all of that's going to count. We have a number of GISPs that have a planning background. We have, what was interesting is this year's Esri conference, we had tons of geologists come up and either expressed interest in getting their GISPs or talked about how they had their GISP. So really, you can get, if it falls in the geospatial body of knowledge, which has over 400 categories, it's going to count towards our educational requirements. And I would say, while a large percentage of our folks do come from geography backgrounds, it's probably only about maybe 60%, and then about 40% come from other backgrounds. So it is very common for folks to come in from different professions and different educational opportunities.
Shay or Emily, maybe one of you can answer this question about if the link to the recording for this will be sent out to everybody that's registered. Oh, Lindsay just replied in there.
Yes, the link will be sent out to all registrants probably early next week.
Thank you. I'm not seeing much else in there.
I see.
Go ahead.
Oh, Jamie answered it. Sean had a question about the exam. Unfortunately, we don't have time. I would, and Jamie said, yeah, go. We do have a number of videos on the YouTube channel. And I think we're going to, in the not too distant future, we're going to do a couple seminars. We're going to do Ask Me Anything, which will be both fun and terrifying. And we plan to do some additional ones as well. We also will be on the road at a number of different state conferences in the upcoming weeks.
Yes, if you attend any of your local regional conferences, be sure to check the agenda because there's often one of us there presenting. Tony is all over the place. And when he can't be there, we have another GISP there as well. And I also put a link to our LinkedIn page, the GISCI LinkedIn page. Be sure to follow there because Tony is often posting where we're going to be next, the different webinars we have coming up, such as this one, and when we have a next workshop.
Any other questions?
Yeah. District conference, Tony, are you going to be at that one?
We have submitted a panel discussion for the NSGIC conference. I don't think the agenda is finalized, but I think right now I believe we're tentatively scheduled for a panel discussion. So we'll see what happens. I know there was a lot more content submitted than they have space for, but I will be there. I will be at the NSGIC conference. So if you're there and want to chat, I'd love to chat with you. Isaac asked about study materials. So as Jamie pointed out, if you go to our website, we do have a lot of study materials. We have an official study guide and an unofficial study guide. Both are very good. We have a free practice exam and one you pay a small fee for. And then we have some additional resources out there. Since we write the test, we can't train. We can't do, I can tell you how to prepare for the exam and I can tell you how to take the exam, but I can't really teach you what's on the exam. So there is one third-party company called Teach Me GIS. They actually have a 3-day prep course for the GISP exam. And one of our goals next year is to spend a lot more time. So I talked a little bit about the pre-GISP, and for most of you, it probably isn't applicable because it is designed for young folks coming out of college. But once we roll that program out, then a priority for next calendar year with board approval is to flesh out what we're calling our pathways. So we have some preliminary information right now called Pathways to Become a GISP, and it's kind of designed to be a guide. So, hey, I just got out of college and I got this GIS job. Now what's next? You know, when I started doing GIS 30 years ago, back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, we had to learn a lot on our own, but we had relatively speaking, a lot of mentors. There was always somebody that kind of pushed us in the right direction. And there doesn't, and that's because we were a small community. You know, I'd go to the Esri conference and I either knew everybody or I recognized everybody. I might not know them, but I knew who they were. Well, lots changed, right? And so we don't see as many folks out there helping guide and mentor folks. ERISA has a great mentoring program that I encourage you to check out if you're a young professional. But we want to write a document that kind of is going to help you walk from, from early, profession to, more into the advanced stages of your profession. So help you grow as a professional. So address things like how do you get your contribution points? That's always the toughest folks our GISPs have is like getting contribution points. And contributions point, we call it contributions to the profession. It's a way that you help move your profession forward. So I talked about being present in the profession. And what I meant by that is it's not bad to show up to work, do your job, go home. And, I shoot fireworks professionally. That's kind of what I do. I do my job. I do it safely. and I come home and that's kind of it. And then I take my training off to the side. But that's a part-time job. I'm not doing anything to make the fireworks industry better. I'm just, making people happy show by show. But on the geospatial side is GIS, which is my main job. I'm involved with a lot of different organizations. Like I said, I was involved with NSGIC for 30 years, contribution points. I was involved with my state council for over 30 years, contribution points. But there's a lot of other ways that you can get those contribution points. They include things like publications. They include things like volunteering, mentoring, being a part of organizations like the GIS Corps. So there's a lot of different ways to get those contributions points. But the idea is that you're present in your profession. You're helping it move forward, whether it's educating young folks or old folks about GIS and the benefits of GIS, or organizing a GIS day, or going to Washington, D.C. and talking to the feds and saying, hey, I represent the state and I represent local governments and tribal governments and stuff. And this is what we feel about this program. Or going and trying to get that money for your state for imagery and those types of things. If you don't have people volunteering to do that, it's never going to happen. Yes, Jamie, a year of membership from, so ERISA and SCOG are two organizations that will give you a free year of membership with new GISP certification. And thank you for reminding me to send the list to ERISA, because we just had our exam in June, and I think we've handed out about over 100 plus GISP certifications in the last few weeks. So I will send that today.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, Tony, Jamie, Liz, thank you so much for your time. It was a lot of great information. Everyone who joined us, thank you for your time. We know you are very busy. We will send out information in about a week with information on this presentation and links, how you can see more, and hopefully we'll see you at future GIS 101. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was nice to meet all of you virtually. I hope to see you all at the NSGIC Annual. And thanks, Shay.
Richard, 1 second, Jamie will drop that in the chat, a link to where to apply to take the exam. Although I'm guessing it's also on that exam prep page, but.
Yeah, we're just real quick. I mean, if people want to drop, that's fine. But for the, I think Richard that asked, we are in the process right now of, you can sign up for the exam, but we are switching exam providers. So you will not get, you will not be able to register for your particular exam location and date for another week or two while we get all the pieces in place to make that happen. But we will be making an announcement about that change. We're very excited about switching exam providers.
Richard is excited about doing this.
Awesome.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, everyone.